This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by Lighter Creative. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past week of 40k events and talk about what's currently winning. This is a relatively large weekend for 40k with multiple major plus level events going down, including events like the Leipzig Major, Alpine Con Singles, and Tennessee Elite Open. And moving on to our metagame breakdown, we can see that a lot of the old staples of the metagame so far have retained their place at the top. Ultramarines back on top with no less than 5 undefeated results. That at Ludiverse Solo, Montana Beerhammer GT, the Wardome Champs, Ice Hammer ITC GT, and the Alpine Con Singles. Similarly, Chaos Space Marines also doing well, using their new and now fully legal Defiler datasheet that includes the 36 Chambers, Montana Beerhammer GT, and Radicalism. Necrons also continuing to see a little bit of success with 2 undefeated results at the Leipzig Major, as well as the Warhammer 40,000 Grand Tournament event, I guess. Tyranids, interestingly, showcasing some Xenos success at Alpine Con Singles and Iberian Cito Invasion. Orks also doing well at Willen Games April and the Fool's Crusade. That Fool's Crusade event, I don't know what was going on over there. I think the intention was for it to be maybe a little bit less hyper-competitive, but the lists from that event are insane, which we're also going to talk about with Chaos Knights, who also took down a 5-0 result at that event, but also the Iberian GT Anduin. Deathwatch also continuing to do pretty well at the AZ League Spring Champs, as well as the Leipzig Major. That Leipzig Major is showing up a lot here because it was a large Super Major level event, but only ran 5 rounds, so it ended up with 5 undefeated players going 5-0. In addition to that, we also see Iron Hands doing well at Samara Heat Solo, as well as Wogmaster. Blood Angels continuing the Space Marine success at Radicalism. Adeptus Custodes going 5-0 at Leipzig Major alongside Tau Empire and Leagues of Votann. Astra Militarum taking down the Lethal Hits GT. Drukhari also undefeated at the Warhammer 40,000 Grand Tournament event. Death Guard winning Perils of the Geekery, and last but certainly not least, Adepta Sororitas winning the 7-round Tennessee Elite Open singles event. And let's dive into these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video has been sponsored by Lighter Creative, one of the biggest supporters of the channel and one of my favorite sponsors. And in the past, Lighter Creative has been the producers of incredible quality gaming mats, including mats that have grids and deployment zones demarcated on them, as well as WTC compatible terrain. However, one of my other favorite things is chapter-proof 2025 terrain. We use it online for my event series, and that's what I typically play on when I go to tournaments. And now these two tastes can taste great together because Lighter Creative is responsible for a new line of gorgeous-looking chapter-proof 2025 terrain sets. These babies are made out of high-quality, high-density board and include some absolutely gorgeous printed artwork. The sets come stock with a very cool semi-translucent base system. They do outline the edges of the terrain features so you can easily see where the ruins end. On top of that, unlike a ton of other MDF or board-based terrain systems, the Lighter Creative versions are not complex to put together. These new chapter-proof 2025 terrain features go together snugly and sturdily, but are only composed of 1, 2, or maybe 3 pieces. In this case, that allows you to either flip them back and forth, allowing for a single set to make all of the terrain layouts in the CA 2025 tournament packet without having to get additional pieces. I'm always impressed by Lighter Creative's terrain offerings, and this is no different. And it's nice to see them support more terrain formats than just WTC. So check out the links in the video description or scan the QR code on screen now to get access to yours. And big thanks to Lighter Creative for sponsoring the video. Let's get back to the content. So starting with our metagame frontrunner, Ultramarines, we're going to move over to the Montana Beerhammer GT. This list very nicely asked me to not stop reading after reading the detachment, which I would have otherwise because it is a regular Blades of Ultramar. That said, unlike most of Blades of Ultramar, this list takes basically all of the special unique characters for Ultramarines, which is neat. I think we're missing Chief Librarian Tigurius, but we have most of the other ones. That includes a standard captain with Oath of McCrag, Captain Titus, as well as a Phobos Lieutenant. That's the one that lets you move after shooting. Kind of neat, with Armor of Antoninus to make him harder to kill. He becomes an incredibly useful utility in it. He's able to deep strike in, shoot, then move, and he's not that easy to take down with a 2+ save and a Feel No Pain, which is cool. We also have another Lieutenant with Veteran of Behemoth, as well as a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, Marnius Calgar in his new Terminator armor, Robute Gilliman, and Uriel Ventress. I guess we're also missing Cato Sicarius, probably. On top of that, we also have an Assault Intercessor squad for one of those characters to hop into, a Blade Guard veteran squad that's just a 3-man to act as one of the character attachments, an Incursor squad, 2 Infiltrator squads to act as utility. One of those is going to get the benefit of that Phobos Librarian, which is incredibly strong against a lot of teleporting matchups that we see in the metagame right now. Especially things like Deathwatch that are reliant on those deep-striking ranged attackers get totally turned off by the Phobos Librarian, and that allows that unit to interact on the board without really having to worry about any kill teams coming out of site-to-site teleportation and shooting them. It's actually impossible. You can't shoot them when you're outside 12 inches, and you can't enter within 12 inches coming from deep strike, so you just can't interact whatsoever. You have to rapid ingress and then charge them, basically. But you then have reactive moves and other mechanics that you can use in Blade of Ultramar to keep them alive. We also then have a bunch of Stern Guard veteran squads, 2 units of 10, all of those being equipped with their bespoke heavy bolters as well as Stern Guard weapons. So that includes their up to 3-shot rapid-firing Stern Guard rifles. Those are good attachments for a lot of these characters. Units like the captains or the other special characters are going to be able to hop in and gain the benefit of wound rerolls from those Stern Guard veterans when they target their Oath of Moment target, of which you get 2 from the inclusion of Robute Gilliman. So we can get both good melee damage out of the characters in addition to solid ranged damage as well from their own devastating wound weapons. And if you attach characters like Captain Titus, potentially you do then get sustained hits on top of that. Rounding out the list are the classic Wardens of Ultramar, who could dual attach with Captain Titus. He can join the unit and attach both of them into another squad to keep one of these big infantry bricks alive, which would be pretty cool. I don't exactly know where all of these characters are going. They all have a lot of potential attachment options. However, we do have a lot of interesting places for them to go. We have a bunch of individual characters who can either operate independently or attach into units. Things like the Phobos Lieutenant could attach to one of the Phobos units, or he could operate by himself to use his grab shoot. We also have units like those captains who are likely going to be jumping into squads like the Blade Guard Veterans and the Assault Intercessors. Pretty insane stuff from Ultramarines, and cool to see not a standard Repulsor Executioner and vehicle-filled list from Blade of Ultramar. Now with that, we're going to hop on over to one of the larger events of the weekend, the 122-player Radicalism, which saw both Blood Angels and Chaos Space Marines do well. In this case, we're going to be talking about Chaos Space Marines, which were piloted by Liam Stevens, who was playing Pact-Bound Zealots. This detachment's been seeing a lot of play recently because of the prevalence of very heavy armor in the meta, but it does seem like a very good place to put things like the new Defiler profiles, as well as just being a good delivery system for a lot of the really powerful units that we got from the campaign books most recently. Now, a bit of an interesting interaction here is that Pact-Bound Zealots, naturally, this is the detachment that gives all of your units a Mark of Chaos and restricts some of their interactions outside of marked units. For example, characters can only join other units that have marks with them. However, some of the new units, for example, the Masters of the Maelstrom, are actually able to interact with non-marked units. So they are an undivided unit naturally, but because they don't join units as a normal character, they're actually able to attach to units that do not share the mark, which potentially allows you to construct situations where you have multiple marks of chaos on a single unit, which it definitely improves the detachment quite a bit if you are including that combination. Now, in this case, we are running Abaddon the Despoiler, in addition to Huron Blackheart and the Masters of the Maelstrom, plus Cypher, the great man himself. We have 2 Cultist Mob for the backlines, as well as 2 units of Chosen. 1 Chaos Undivided unit of 5, that is to attach most likely to Abaddon the Despoiler, and then we have a Slaneshi unit of 10, which I imagine is going to dual attach alongside the Masters of the Maelstrom and alongside Huron Blackheart. That creates this big, very difficult to deal with brick. It ends up being 16 models after everyone's attached. They're multi-wounds, they can regenerate models, they have reactive moves, they're very difficult to engage with. On top of that, we also then have a Chaos Biker unit with Mark of Nurgle to be good utility units, in addition to a pair of Chaos Vindicators and a Defiler, plus a Hellbrute. The Hellbrute is running Mark of Slaanesh, but all of the other ranged attackers are running Mark of Nurgle to be the very best they can be in terms of shooting. They get sustained hits from their shooting, they get lethal hits from the Hellbrute, they get 5+ criticals when they go to packed for sustained hits, and then they'll trigger both of those off the 5+ thanks to the detachment ability, and they can reroll that thanks to Abaddon to do a significant amount of damage. Now in this case, the Defiler was playing the quad las cannon variety, 2 sets of Hades las cannons in addition to 2 sets of Excruciator cannons as well, so just the mass ranged attack version. The total combination of Pact Bond Zealots does an absolutely phenomenal amount of damage, and the inclusion, as I mentioned before, of Masters of the Maelstrom and Huron Blackheart in the list really solves a lot of its longevity problems. There are some issues with the detachment over the course of the entire game if your opponent's able to dodge or not commit into the big brick of exceptionally high damage ranged attackers. However, Huron Blackheart can either act as a late game anchor, or he can come in the early game and sort of force you to interact with the army, which then allows you to the big guns to counterattack. So it's kind of a match made in the warp, I suppose. The other benefit, too, is the access to 18-inch Lone Operative that the detachment has for Nurgle units, which can protect the Defiler in the early game. One downside of that thing, obviously, is its physical mass, which makes it very difficult to hide in some terrain layouts. However, being able to pay a command point to force your opponent to get within 18 inches to shoot it does make this detachment basically one of the best homes for a Defiler. It seems to me that as long as you can make at least one Defiler very difficult to kill, you can play on almost any table. If you have good high terrain density board layouts, then you could potentially hide one Defiler and then keep another one more aggressive in order to layer your defensive technology on them. And the Dark Obscuration, or the new version, whatever they renamed it in the Codex, is basically the perfect place for that. Now with that, we're going to move on over to the 52-player Fool's Crusade, which had some absolutely insane lists, and we're going to keep on the Chaos trend by talking about the second place finisher from that event. This was Ben Ruffin, who was playing an Iconoclast Fiefdom in Chaos Knights. Now this is the detachment that allows you to take Chaos Cultists in addition to your big knights, and the cultists give them a couple of bonuses. The big thing is that the knights are able to essentially Dark Pact to gain either lethal or sustained hits by sacrificing cultists that are in units nearby them. So the cultists can be fed into these giant engines of war, essentially, to improve their attacks. Extremely cool detachment ability thematically, but it has been shown to be, I think, a little bit less consistent as playing Infernal Lance or other similar Codex detachments. Now that said, in this case, we did make it work, and we were playing a trio of Knight Despoilers, all of those running a combination of Gatling cannons, battle cannons, and thermal cannons. We did have one thermal cannon plus Despoiler Gatling cannon equipped knight, so he is able to do some pretty serious damage into both heavy armor and infantry targets. We had one battle cannon and Gatling cannon equipped knight and one standard double Gatling cannon knight. Now, that battle cannon knight had the Pave the Way enhancement, which allows him to grant scouts to damned units within 6 inches of him. The army was playing a ton of scouting units to push up the table, so he gives them a lot of early game board presence and protects against other forward operating armies, which is great. Another one's taking a Profane Altar so that he gains both lethal and sustained hits. That's the double Gatling cannon variety. And the third is running Tyrant's Banner, which relaxes some of the targeting restrictions on sacrificing damned models to him. So just making that easier to use his detachment ability. Now from there, we were running a pair of Vordog Carnivores, as well as just an immense number of allies. That includes a grand total of 70 Chaos Cultists, 2 units of 20, as well as 3 units of 10, all of those equipped with melee weapons. But that gives a huge breadth of both utility units with objective secure that we can get from those cultist mobs, but also availability for sacrifices to gain the sustained or lethal hits on the big knights. In addition, one of those 20-man squads can be the target of wretched masses to regenerate that unit and respawn it once it's destroyed. Now, on top of that, we're also bringing a bunch of demon allies as well to shore up that scoring. That includes 2 units of 3 Nurglings. The nice thing about these is that they're able to forward deploy in front of the scouting units, getting access to scout from Pave the Way, and then prevent any infiltrators from disallowing those cultist mobs to get up in the middle. The cultists can then scout onto objectives in the center and then obsec them before leaving to then shore up the Chaos Knight's ability to hold primary. Last and certainly not least, we have a Poxbringer in here who doesn't have any attachments or anything, but he is a 32 mil based infantry character, so he's able to deep strike in because he is a demon and perform actions and act as a utility guy. He also kind of hits relatively hard. He's a little bit difficult to kill because he has a field no pain. He's not the worst thing ever. He's definitely a cool little guy, and for only 55 points, getting a very difficult to screen utility unit that can hop in the backline is pretty impactful. Now, moving on, I want to talk about the first place placer of the same event, the Fool's Crusade, that being Orks. Orks had actually a pretty good run this week. They had multiple undefeateds, and in this case, it was a pretty wild Cult of Speed build from Darcy Harthouse, going 5-0 and actually winning the event. That includes a Def Killa Wartrike with Waz Blasta, which gives him a shoot and scoot effect. He can move after shooting up to 6 inches, but then can't charge. With the ability to shoot after advancing, that allows the Defkilla to go pretty far and then operate kind of as a utility unit. It is only 10 points, so it might also be a points filler. I don't know necessarily if there's a lot of strategy behind this, but it does allow you to get maneuver secondaries pretty easily with that character. We also then have a Mega Armor Warboss, in addition to a boys unit, a single truck, 18 Defcoptas, which is kind of the classic inclusion for this detachment. This is very much the Defcopta detachment, I think in a lot of cases, because it has so many good stratagems to improve their damage output, in addition to just naturally giving them advance or fallback, shoot, and charge, which obviously is great for a hybrid melee and ranged unit like the Defcoptas are. We have 2 units of 11 Gretchen, including their run herds, in order to act as utility units, a commando squad, as well as a unit of 5 Storm Boys for the same reasons. We have a little bit of damage coming out of a Tank Busta unit, as well as 2 units of Knobs, just for some actually solid melee attackers, on top of a big 5 model unit of Mega Knobs. One of the nice things here is that a lot of the Speed Freaks units don't necessarily need the WOG benefit, because they are able to advance, shoot, and charge naturally because of the detachment ability. The army can sort of hold its use of the WOG until the Knobs, Mega Knobs, or in this case there's also a Tank Busta unit in there, actually get stuck in and benefit from that +1 attack. Otherwise, you can just sort of use the Speed Freaks units to harass your opponent around the sides. You don't have to actually go all in on melee until you're ready to get those heavy infantry units stuck in. So there's a little bit of natural synergy there, although there isn't much explicit synergy between them. And especially a Mega Knobs unit getting benefit from their Feel No Pain by holding a WOG turn until it's very relevant. It does make that pretty interesting. We have a couple of cars in here as well, 2 Megatrack Scrapjets, as well as 2 Shock Jump Dragstas. The Scrapjets do some pretty serious melee damage. They're a nice little counter-punch unit that's not the easiest thing in the world to take down. And the Dragstas, while their damage output isn't particularly high, they are very maneuverable, so being able to teleport them around the table for maneuver secondaries without having to push forward your other utility squads is pretty helpful. Although screening them is pretty easy because their base size is relatively large. However, what isn't as big are the 2 units of 3 Warbikers in there, which are good at harassment, engaging enemies, and on the WOG turn, and also just advancing and charging into other situations as well. Pretty wild list. It's always cool to see Cult of Speed doing well, and especially a Cult of Speed list that is not necessarily all in on Defcoptas. Obviously, this does have all the Defcoptas, but we aren't taking a lot of the other ranged attackers that we sometimes see in this detachment, but focusing on a more hybrid build that also includes those melee infantry, which is very nice to see. Now, moving on over to the Leipzig Major. I mentioned this event earlier. It was 177 players and ended up with 5 undefeated results. So tons and tons of undefeated from this one. But we're going to talk about a couple of Xenos factions, starting with Necrons, who went 5-0 and took 2nd place at that event. In this place, they were run by Richard Kirsch, who was playing an Awakened Dynasty build with 1 billion characters, as is the way for this build. And now, in this case, we're running a Catacomb Command Barge for bonus OC, Illuminor Ceres, Imhotep the Stormlord in order to fuel the reactive reanimation effects that the detachment has with extra command points. We have Necrosaur Amintar for a little bit of counterpunch melee damage. Oracan the Diviner to empower a 20 model Brick of Warriors in addition to a Royal Warden with a Netherrealm Casket for the same reason. A Scorpic Lord with an Agic Durable Bond, so he's very difficult to kill. So between him and Illuminor Ceres, we have 2 4+ Field Note Bane characters who can respawn themselves with a Protocol of the Eternal Revenant. We then have 2 additional Scorpic Lords. Following that up is the 20 model Warrior Brick that I mentioned, in addition to a Ghost Arc, so we have access to its reactive reanimation in addition to the one from the detachment. A Canoptek Reanimator to buff those reanimations. A Cryptothrall unit to attach into the squad in addition to a Scarab Swarm. The nice thing about the Scarab Swarm is that you do have Cryptek units in the center of the table, both with Oracan the Diviner, if you do have a position for him to hide around the middle, and with Illuminar Ceres. So those guys will very oftentimes get their OC characteristic that they need to perform actions and take objectives, which is good. We then also have a Flayed One unit, an Ophidian Destroyer unit, and a Tombblade unit, all for utility purposes, in addition to 9 Scorpic Destroyers, 3 units of 3, to attach into those Scorpic Lords. So all of those can act as the counter punches to the Warrior Brick. That Warrior Brick is, in most cases, essentially unassailable by most armies in the game. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to actually kill it, because you're going to fight into a reactive reanimation, shoot it again, fight into the second instance of a reactive reanimation. Then at the end of the phase, if it hasn't been one-shot at that point, you can use one of the Resurrection Orbs, the Catacomb Command Barge's Resurrection Orb, to regenerate it again. So up to 3 regenerations in your own turn, then you go back to your opponent's turn and they reanimate an additional time. All that going through a 4+ invulnerable save, all backed up by the Netherrealm Casket and the Armor of Contempt effect that Illuminor Ceres gives you. It basically makes that unit impossible to kill. So if you are committing into it to either prevent it from taking objectives or to try to get rid of it, the Scorpic units can come back. The Destroyers hit relatively hard themselves, but the Scorpic Lords are the headliners there. They get those rerolls and lethal hits on the charge, in addition to potential devastating wounds and mortal wounds when they charge as well. And then anytime you kill them, you can Protocol of the Eternal Revenant the Scorpic Lords back, and most often get a second activation out of them, and that's where a lot of the actual damage comes from. Not to mention the fact that they are buffed and empowering Necrosaur Amintar as well. Now, moving on from there over to Tyranids, who also had an uncharacteristically good week this week with 2 undefeated results. We're going to talk about the massive Alpine Con singles, which was 202 players, ran 6 rounds to 2 undefeated, but I don't think I ended up actually playing the round 7 top cut. Now, in this case, Alexander Kondakov went 6-0 with the faction, running a Subterranean Assault list, running a Hive Tyrant, a Hyper-Adapted Ravager unit, a Neuro Tyrant, and a Trigon Prime. We had 2 units of Hormagaunts to act as disruption pieces and utility. The nice thing about them, too, is that the Hormagaunts they have a long threat range on the table, so it's not really required that they teleport in like it is with many other disruption units that Tyranids take in this detachment. So the Hormagaunts can act as early game screens or objective contestation without having to commit any of your burrowers to create tunnels to deliver other units. We have a Biovore, obviously, because it's a Tyranid army, and he comes basically with the territory. A Haruspex, which is an interesting inclusion. These guys have a tough time delivering themselves normally, but Subterranean Assault's going to be able to do that by creating tunnels for them. A pair of Maleceptors, in addition to 2 Raveners, a Neurolictor, a Rupture Cannon Tyrannifex for anti-tank, and a Zoanthrope unit for some additional shooting. Overall, pretty standard stuff from Subterranean Assault, but as always, it is nice to see Tyranids getting some wins. Now, moving over to Space Marines, we'll stay here for a little bit and return to the Leipzig Major to talk about Sebastian Bless and his Deathwatch Black Spear Task Force, a relatively standard variety of Black Spear Task Force, but in this case, going back to the age-old tradition of taking multiple combi weapon lieutenants. They don't overlap their reroll ones effect. They just give you more instances of the same effect on a single objective marker. Basically, if you have a combi weapon lieutenant at the start of the game, then you choose an objective marker, and you'll gain the rerolls for that objective marker as long as at least one combi weapon lieutenant still remaining on the battlefield. So they don't have a lot of synergy between each other. However, getting access to two individual instances of lone operative is good for a Deathwatch, which is an army that doesn't necessarily want to take and hold territory with its big kill teams. It wants to try to play keep away with those guys for as long as it can before it has to send them onto objectives. So the combi weapon lieutenants are good for ensuring that you get good scores early. Now, from there, we're taking a Gravis Armored Captain with Thief of Secrets, a Judiciar with Beacon Angelus, in addition to a Tome of Ectoclades Watchmaster. We have a Deathwatch veteran squad with a bunch of melee weapons for the Judiciar. Obviously, the Gravis Captain goes into an Indomitor kill team, and the Watchmaster goes into a Fortis kill team. We have an Intercessor squad for the backline to shore up that backline screening and objective secure, in addition to 3 Fortis kill teams, those guys with a combination of plasma guns, as well as their indirect fire from Castellan and Wenger launchers. One of those gets attached with the Watchmaster, so they get advance and shoot, but they also are able to use his points cost, or his command points cost discount, I should say, to discount things like mission tactics or special issue ammunition that you can then apply also to your Indomitor kill teams that are coming out of reserve. We then have a pair of Incursor squads, in addition to 2 Indomitor kill teams. Those guys all equipped with the standard loadout of aggressors with power fists, melter rifle equipped eradicators, and a couple of heavy bolter equipped heavy intercessors in the unit. Relatively standard stuff from Deathwatch, not really breaking any crazy new molds here. Now, another Space Marine chapter, a little unexpected, also did well this weekend, that being Iron Hands. And if you've been watching my content recently, Iron Hands have kind of gotten a bit of a resurgence in recent weeks, just with the number of Ultramarine armies that are doing well slowly decreasing. Iron Hands has come in as essentially like the second or third best Space Marine subfaction. Now, in this case, we're heading on over to the Wagmaster 6, which was won by Johan Nicolasen. This was a 40-player event, and he went 5-0 to win the event, running a Hammer of Avernii detachment. Now, in this case, he was running a Terminator Ancient with Steel Front that allows him to regenerate models back into his Terminator unit, plus Canik Var, a combi weapon lieutenant, and a Tech Marine. The nice thing here is that it gives you an enormous Terminator Assault Squad that you can start on the middle of the table and either dual attach Canik Var and the Terminator Ancient, or have Canik Var teleport separately in order to apply his double oath effect you get from that detachment ability. Then that unit is just a very difficult to kill squad. It hits pretty hard in melee because you can give it +1 to hit and potentially +1 to wound if it's taking casualties. But if it, over the course of the game, you're trying to chew through 40 wounds with the 4+ invuln save, toughness 5, that you can then regenerate one model back in per turn. They're very difficult to interact with. We have an Intercessor squad for the backline, plus utility from a Jump Pack Assault Intercessor squad and an Incursor squad. Then a lot of the work of the list is coming from a pair of Redemptor Dreadnoughts, a pair of Repulsor Executioners, and a Vindicator. The army does have some good synergy with Dreadnoughts. A lot of the stratagems that you would typically see used on veterans in this First Company Task Force style of list can target Redemptors or Dreadnought units in general, in addition to the Repulsor Executioners and the Vindicator just being highly efficient profiles that we can also buff with our Tech Marine. I also like to think here that there's a little bit of thematic list building happening, because I think the choice to take things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts obviously is synergistic with the detachment, but taking a heavier focus on vehicle profiles also makes sense for Iron Hands. So it's cool to see a little bit of thematic army construction there. Now, with that, we're moving back to Radicalism and the winning list of that event, which was Nick Burrows running an Angelic Inheritors Blood Angels army. I absolutely love these armies. Every time they crop up, they're sort of wild. Now, in this case, Nick was playing an Apothecary, a pair of Jump Pack Captains, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant with Ordained Sacrifice, which allows him to bring himself back to life after he dies. It regenerates once per game, as well as the Sanguinor. We have an Intercessor squad, an Assault Jump Pack Intercessor squad for utility, as well as Inheritors here's where things start to get crazy, exactly 1 Devastator squad. That's to attach in with the Apothecary, so they gain the character keyword, which then allows them to benefit from reroll 1s to hit, potentially, as well as an 18-inch lone operative effect. And if you do take some casualties, you can regenerate models back into that unit. So, while the Apothecary doesn't really do anything explicitly for them, being able to then benefit from the detachment effects is huge, and it allows you to begin the game out in the open and start trading shots with people with las cannons from behind the protection of that lone operative effect, which is cool. On top of that, we have a pair of Gladiator Lancers for some backline shooting, an Incursor squad for +1 to hit to improve the lot of those ranged attackers. It's likely the case in most cases for these Blood Angels lists that you are going to be applying your Oath of Moment to whatever you're shooting with the Devastator squad and potentially the Gladiators, because most of your melee units are hitting on 2s and rerolling 1s from the detachment ability anyway. You don't necessarily need it, but the Incursor squads let that Oath of Moment go a little bit farther. We also have a trio of Sanguinary Guard units for the captains to hop into. 3 units of those. Those are all equipped with Carmine Blades, in addition to their Banners and Inferno Pistols, and a pair of Vindicators as well. So a lot of backline, pretty powerful shooting to make use of Oath of Moment, and then the melee is going to be largely those Sanguinary Guard and the characters that get all of those character synergies that you get from Angelic Inheritors, plus we get that cool synergy with the Apothecary and the Devastator squad. Always cool to see armies like this, because it's very different than the classic versions of Blood Angels that we typically see, and this detachment makes some of the lesser used units in the Space Marine Codex, things like Apothecaries, things like Devastator squads, much more interesting. Now we're going to round out our discussion about the Leipzig Major by just covering all of the other undefeated lists from that event. Starting with the first place placer, the winner of the event, Luis Cabrera, who was playing Adeptus Custodes, but not the standard Adeptus Custodes that you would typically expect to see, which is a Land Raider version, Talons of the Emperor build. Instead, we are looking at Lions of the Emperor. The detachment gives you +1 to hit and wound if you are far away from other friendlies, and running kind of just a bunch of infantry squads. In this case, it was taking a Blade Champion with Superior Creation, in addition to an Alaris Terminator Captain with Admana Mortis, Trajan Valoris, and another unupgraded Blade Champion. We had a trio of 4-man Custodian Guard squads to attach some of those characters, in addition to 2 Custodian Warden squads, which typically attach in with the Blade Champions. We then had 1 unit of 2 Alaris Custodians for attachment with the Admana Mortis Captain to provide him their rerolls, plus 3 Witchseeker units and a Calidus Assassin for utility, and Inquisitor Kyria Draxus to apply her own damage to one of those Custodian Guard squads. Standard inclusions for a lot of these builds, but it's been a lot of time since we've seen a non-Land Raider Adeptus Custodes build doing well, and it's always cool to see a list that is taking kind of what is essentially a bit of an OG archetype. Although taking things like Trajan Valoris is always pretty interesting, because that guy does hit like an absolute truck once he's in a Custodian Guard squad, and benefiting from that detachment ability for +1 to wound. Tau Empire also did well at the Leipzig Major, with Arne Clemens going 5-0 with a Mont Ka detachment, and a little bit of a different Mont Ka detachment, although we will see a lot of things that are very similar to the basically baseline Tau build. This includes an Ethereal with Strike Swiftly to give things Scout, in addition to a Firesight Marksman with Strategic Conqueror. That gives a +1 OC bonus to an objective that he chooses at the start of the game, as long as he's on the battlefield. And given that the Firesight Marksman team is a relatively safe lone operative spotting unit, they can stay relatively far back and don't really have to push into the middle of the table, so they can consistently get that Strategic Conqueror bonus over the course of the game, which is sweet. We then have a bunch of Ion delivery systems that includes 2 Ghostkill battlesuits and 3 Hammerhead gunships, all of them equipped with their respective Ion weapons, which do get the benefits of that lethal hit from the detachment ability and have an easier time getting stuck in the early game thanks to Strike Swiftly from the Ethereal, which is neat. We then have 3 Pathfinder teams, all of those equipped with ion rifles of their own, and all of them equipped with recon drones to get that infiltration, in addition to a single Piranha, 3 Riptide battlesuits, a unit of stealth battlesuits for spotting, and a unit of Vespid Stingwings for utility. Big highlighter here is the massive number of ion cannon weapons that this army is packing. A lot of times we would see hammerhead railguns for late game shooting when you're not benefiting from those lethal hits. We just need some consistent anti-vehicle damage. Also, things like broadside battlesuits are very common in that spot, but in this case we elected to basically say we're going to do a bunch more primary objective control thanks to the combination of the scouting, the infiltration from the Ghost Kill battlesuits, and Strategic Conqueror, and we're just going to fire a lot more of those anti-heavy infantry weapons. Rounding out the event, Mathieu Clerc also went 5-0 at Leipzig Major with a Leagues of Votann Hearthband list. This was an interesting one. It was taking a lot of the special characters from Leagues of Votann, I think more than we would typically see. That includes an Arcanist Evaluator. These guys did get recently a points cost reduction, and I think a lot of people are taking them as kind of a hybrid utility unit and an anti-utility unit. They have a pretty good chance of just knocking out 5 or 6 infantry models with their transmatter inverter if they set it to the full charge. And being able to deploy aggressively and force your opponent to deal with them while being a little lone operative character is kind of nice. We also are taking Beric Stormbrow, the newly discounted Chthonian Berserk character, in addition to Buri Agnerson and a Call. So in total, we do have Beric, who is a pretty good sort of melee combatant, but we also have potentially 2 lone operative characters who can both access early game objectives in the early game. We have a Hearthkin Warrior unit that's going to get split into 2 squads by a Sagittor. Similarly, a Herdkin Jaeger squad with a Capricus Carrier. Pretty simple stuff. 2 units of Brokir Thunderkin with Graviton Blast Cannons to get that Ignore Cover bonus. 2 units of Chthonian Berserks, both of those with Concussion Mauls that could attach into with Beric Stormbrow to get that Sustained Hits bonus from him. We also then have 2 units of Einhir Hearthguard, 1 of 5 and 1 of 10. I imagine that the Call, which is taking a Teleport Crest, is going to attach into the big 10-man of Einhir Hearthguard, but I'm not 100% sure. We then have 2 Hecaton Land Fortresses to deliver those smaller infantry units like the Brokir Thunderkin and the Chthonian Berserks, and a Hernkin Pioneer unit with 3 models in it. Pretty standard stuff for the most part, but it's cool to see Beric Stormbrow and a little bit more of a heavy focus on those melee characters and Chthonian units than we typically see out of a Hearthband detachment. A lot of times what we would end up seeing is an additional unit of 5 Einhir Hearthguard to skirmish in the early game, and then a lot of the focus would be on the second unit of 10 Einhir Hearthguard, but I think in this case, the ability to counterattack with your lone operatives or counterattack with your Chthonian Berserks, who are going to be that much more effective thanks to Beric, definitely takes a lot of the pressure off the Hearthguard for this detachment. Now, moving on from there, we're going to go over to the Lethal Hits GT. This was a 28-player event and was won by Ryan Cook, who is running Astra Militarum in a Grizzled Company. Kind of a standard build that we've seen recently with a focus on Militarum Tempestus command squads. In this case, we had a Cadian Castellan and a Cadian command squad, in addition to a couple of Ogryn bodyguards, one of which could hop into that unit. That includes Nork Deadog and a standard Ogryn bodyguard. We then have 3 Militarum Tempestus command squads, in addition to a Rogue Eldorn commander, 1 big unit of 20 Cadian shock troopers to attach the combination of the characters, the Cadian characters in there, plus a Death Corps of Krieg unit for some more utility. 2 Chimeras and a Taurox to deliver some of the early game scouting infantry, which includes 3 units of Khazarkin, as well as 2 units of Krieg combat engineers. So we have a lot of early board table presence gained from those units that can then open up deep strike zones for the Tempestus Scions, of which there are 3 units, 2 units of 10 and 1 unit of 5, 1 for each of the Tempestus command squads. Now those Tempestor Primes are all running command rods, so they can get double order application on them, and because of the detachment ability from Grizzled Company, they can come in and they can issue themselves 2 orders right as they arrive. So they're going to get first rank fire, second rank fire for that additional rapid fire shots, in addition to +1 to hit. So they're very consistent, especially if they target enemies on objectives. They're relatively efficient shooting, and they have great synergy with the detachment ability. Now moving over to the aptly named Warhammer 40,000 Grand Tournament. We're going to be looking at the second place list from this event, that being Drukhari, being played in a Spectacle of Spite by Patrick Harrison. Now in this case, Patrick was playing Lady Malice, Lelith Hesperax, as well as a Succubus with Morgana's Curse. in addition to 40 witches to use their reactive charge that Spectacle Spike gets access to, and a bunch of other witch units, I guess witch cult units, that includes 25 Hellions in 2 units of 10 and a unit of 5, as well as 15 Reavers in 2 units of 6 and a unit of 3. Those will all get the massive benefits from the combat drugs from the detachment and act as a lot of your counterpunch. From there, we also have some good utility gained from a trio of Venoms. 3 Venoms in total to combat squad 3 of the 4 witch units, and we have a Raider, which can embark the 4th unit of witches and deliver them into the fight as well. Now, on top of that, we have a pair of Darklands heavy weapon Scourge units, as well as a Chronos for pain token regeneration. Now, heading on over to the 44-player Perils of the Geekery GT, we have a really interesting build coming from Death Guard that focuses very, very heavily on this new Death Guard Defiler profile. This is Aaron Hermstedt, who ended up taking down the event with a Virulent Vectorium detachment. This includes a Demon Prince of Nurgle, so you get some free stratagems with Revolting Regeneration, a Lord of Contagion, a Lord of Virulence for those rerolls on your ranged attacks, in addition to Mortarion. Now, we are pushing that big tanky profile as far forward as we can in this particular build. So following that up is a Chaos Spawn unit for utility, in addition to 3 units of Poxwalkers for some additional utility. The nice thing about them too is that you get infiltrating objective secured units, which is always great. Plus, a Deathstride Terminator unit for some melee counterpunch to attach in with your Lord of Virulence. Now, in addition to that, are just a bunch of Defilers. 3 Defilers in total with a combination of weapons. 2 of them are running heavy Reaper autocannons, as well as Excruciator cannons, and 1 of them is running Hades las cannons, in addition to Excruciator cannons. All of them are running the Hades battle cannon profile. Now, normally, you would expect to see a very heavy emphasis on the las cannons, in addition to the plasma cannon on the turret-mounted weapon hardpoint. However, the Death Guard Defiler has access to a natural +1 AP by reducing enemy saving throw characteristics with Rattlejoint Ague, I believe is the name of the contagion that they can project. But also, the Death Guard Defiler strips cover from units that they shoot at. So what you're able to do is use the Hades las cannon profile to apply the cover ignoring effect to a target at a high base AP and long range that you can then get the benefits from your battle cannon profiles. So pushing the attack volume of these Defilers makes absolutely the most sense in Death Guard of all places. But in addition to that, those Defilers are also going to get access to things like Reactive Shoot and Reactive Move, thanks to Mortarion. So this entire army becomes just incredibly difficult to interact with. You have extremely dangerous shooting at the front line. You have a ton of tanky profiles. These 18 wound Defilers, plus obviously Mortarion being super tough to kill, means that you have to overcommit into killing them, and in doing so, you are walking into all of those reactive effects. Reactive shooting, fight on death, all that stuff can potentially be triggered for those Defilers. And with that, we're going to move on to the last list of the week, and one of the larger events of the week, that being the Tennessee Elite Open Singles, a 150-player major. In this case, it ran all 7 rounds and was won by Scott Ketchum, running Adepta Sororitas in a Hallowed Martyrs detachment. Scott, in this case, was playing a Canoness with Saintly Example, so she's able to generate Miracle Dice when she's destroyed, or additional Miracle Dice, I should say. The nice thing as well is that she is, in this case, running a Null Rod, so she's more difficult to kill for mortal wounds, which is good to protect against things like tank shocks and grenades that can kill her without your opponent otherwise wasting activations. However, the Null Rod says, I'll probably live, so you'll have to dedicate an additional attack. We also have a Demonifuge, as well as a Dialogus, Judith Erowita, Morvenval, a Palatine with 3 Suffering Strength, and the Triumph of St. Catherine. Just a ton of characters, but if you thought we were done, we're not, because we also took 3 Ministorum Priests. And the Ministorum Priests have a lot of attachment options in this case. They can attach into things like Arcoflagellants, which are in the army, in addition to the Sanctifiers, which are also in the army, or they can act simply as utility units by themselves, because you can Divine Intervene to bring them back to life when they're destroyed, and they generate Miracle Dice, plus they're relatively inexpensive, so you're able to trade them out pretty reasonably. And they actually don't hit terribly because they can use their once per game additional extra 3 attacks, their finest hour style of ability. So in this detachment, actually just a super duper useful little unit. Now, in addition to that, we are also taking a Sororitas Rhino that can potentially embark the Sanctifier unit to gain Scout and then act as a delivery system for your other infantry units. So it is classic for Adeptus Sororitas to have ranks of infantry that will alternatively disembark and then re-embark into the Rhino in order to gain its extra threat range. We have a pair of Celestian Incendant squads, in addition to a Celestian Sacrosanct squad, an Arco-Flagellant unit, 1 of 10, as well as 1 of 3 for utility, in addition to a Retributor squad, and as I mentioned before, that Sanctifier unit that can act as an early game harassment piece to clear out a utility unit, charge in, get some additional work done, potentially contest an objective, and then eventually die and deliver some miracle dice to you for your subsequent turns that you can then make use of with all the characters. I should mention as well, there is a Paragon Warsuit squad in here for Morven Vault to attach into as well. So pretty wild list, taking just a massive number of characters. Now, obviously, characters are fairly common for Hallowed Martyrs, but this is, I think, more extreme than we've seen in many builds previously, which is neat. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. And thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise. Big shout out to Lighter Creative for sponsoring this video. And shout out to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.